Wisconsin. A toddler, his mother, and grandmother were detained and sent to an immigration detention center by immigration agents who questioned their immigration status just because they were speaking Spanish.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to True Voice. I'm your host, Andrew. Today, we're diving into something truly disturbing that just happened in Congress, something that highlights a huge problem with the current state of immigration enforcement. If you're someone who believes in justice, fairness, and upholding the rights of every citizen, regardless of race, background, or how they speak, then you need to hear what Representative Pramila Jayapal had to say about her recent amendment. Please hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this. Now let's watch the video.
My amendment is simple, and I hope that it has bipartisan support. It simply states that none of the funds in this bill may be used by Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain or deport U.S. citizens. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I hope we can all agree that U.S. citizens should never be detained by ICE or any agency conducting civil immigration enforcement. They certainly should not be deported. This should not be a partisan issue. It's about protecting the most basic constitutional rights of U.S. citizens. My Republican colleagues have loved to profess their commitment to the rule of law, and yet they remain silent as this administration tramples on the civil rights of U.S. citizens under the guise of immigration enforcement. ICE has zero authority to even detain U.S. citizens, as ICE's own policy states, quote, as a matter of law, ICE cannot assert its civil immigration enforcement authority to arrest and or detain a U.S. citizen. So I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, that ICE's policy memo related to detaining U.S. citizens be placed into the record.
Without objection.
And yet, since the second Trump administration began, a troubling pattern has emerged with U.S. citizens being detained by immigration authorities. You just saw a video clip that Representative Balint played. I want to give you a couple of other examples. In late January, only days after President Trump was sworn in, 3 U.S. citizens were out shopping in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A toddler, his mother, and grandmother were detained and sent to an immigration detention center by immigration agents who questioned their immigration status just because they were speaking Spanish. Also in January, ICE arrested a U.S. citizen and held him for over 10 hours despite him having his identification documents on him. And just 2 weeks ago, a 19-year-old U.S. citizen from New Mexico, Jose Hermosillo, was detained by the Department of Homeland Security in Arizona and held for nearly 10 days. According to Mr. Hermosillo, he was in town to visit his girlfriend's family when he had a seizure and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Upon his release, Mr. Hermosillo approached a DHS official believing that the officer could help him. But instead, the officer accused him of being in the United States illegally and arrested him, despite Mr. Hermosillo saying that he was a U.S. citizen. Again, he was held for 10 days until his family was able to locate him. We're talking about a 19-year-old kid who was just released after having a seizure trying to get home. This is truly horrifying. Now, states like Florida are following this administration's dangerous and unlawful deport first and ask questions later approach. Earlier this month, a 20-year-old U.S. citizen in Florida was jailed by local police under a state anti-immigrant law that has already been blocked by a federal judge. Following the arrest of this U.S.-born American, ICE issued a detainer request that the local police keep him in jail, even though ICE had zero authority to detain him. And then just this past weekend, as was mentioned earlier, it appears that 3 U.S. citizens were deported, aged 2, 4, and 7. In the case of the 2-year-old, U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty, who is a Trump appointee, said this American child received, quote, no meaningful due process. Based on reports, the child was detained unlawfully by ICE for 3 days until she was deported with her mom, who was undocumented. The child's father had filed a petition to get the child released into his custody, but was not allowed to communicate with the mother. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a broader, reckless approach to immigration enforcement that is wreaking havoc across our country. And it's sending a chilling message to entire communities that they are a suspect in their own country solely because of their race, their ethnicity, or their heritage. In fact, there is a great article by New York Magazine that discusses all of these incidents, and again, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit that article for the record.
Without objection.
What's even scarier is where this is headed. The president has publicly suggested sending U.S. citizens to a gulag in El Salvador with a record of severe human rights abuses. Under the guise of immigration enforcement, this administration is eroding the foundational democratic norms enshrined in our Constitution. Detaining and deporting U.S. citizens because of reckless and indiscriminate immigration enforcement is unconstitutional, dangerous, and fundamentally wrong. And I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle would support this amendment. I urge every member to make it absolutely clear, no taxpayer dollars should ever be used to violate the rights of U.S. citizens. I yield back.
Now, as a proud left-wing patriot, I've always believed that our country's strength lies in its ability to uphold the rights of its people, all people. That means U.S. citizens, regardless of their skin color, where they come from, or what language they speak. But it seems like we're losing that, and Representative Jayapal is calling out exactly what's going wrong. So what's this all about? Well, Jayapal introduced an amendment that would prevent immigration and customs enforcement, you see, from using any of our tax dollars to detain or deport U.S. citizens. You heard that right. She's trying to ensure that ICE can't abuse its power by locking up people who legally belong in this country, people who are protected by the Constitution, and people who are, as she rightly pointed out, American citizens. And here's the kicker. This shouldn't even be a partisan issue. Protecting U.S. citizens from government overreach should be something we all agree on. It's about protecting the very foundation of democracy, folks. But here's where it gets real. The Republican response? They voted against Jayapal's amendment. That's right. Instead of standing up for U.S. citizens, they sided with the status quo, the same people who are violating civil rights under the guise of immigration enforcement. It gets worse when you hear some of the stories Jayapal shared. Let's break them down because they're not just isolated incidents. These are part of a dangerous pattern that we need to confront. First, in Milwaukee, a toddler, a mother, and a grandmother were detained just because they were speaking Spanish while shopping. I mean, are we really at the point where speaking Spanish in public makes you a target for detention? What happened to the idea of innocent until proven guilty? What happened to treating people with dignity? This is a prime example of how this administration has weaponized immigration enforcement to the point of absurdity. And then, there's the case of Jose Hermosillo, a 19-year-old U.S. citizen from New Mexico who was detained for 10 days after being mistaken for an undocumented immigrant. He was on his way to visit his girlfriend's family, had a seizure, and ended up in the hospital. The man is just trying to get help, and instead he gets detained for nearly 10 days because of an ICE officer's complete disregard for basic human decency. He showed them his ID, but that didn't matter. They still locked him up. Just think about that. A 19-year-old kid in medical distress, and instead of being helped, he's treated like a criminal. That's not just wrong, it's downright inhumane. And don't even get me started on what happened in Florida. A U.S. citizen was jailed under a state anti-immigrant law that was so problematic, a federal judge had to block it. But despite the judge's ruling, ICE issued a detainer request, which, by the way, was completely illegal because ICE had no authority to detain this American citizen. So what did the local police do? They held him anyway. This is not the kind of justice that makes America proud. Then, of course, there's the absolutely horrifying case of a 2-year-old U.S. citizen being deported alongside her mother. The child was detained unlawfully for 3 days by ICE, without due process, and was then deported. A judge had to step in, saying the child received no meaningful due process, yet the damage was already done. This little girl was sent away, torn from her home, from her father, all because of an unchecked and indiscriminate approach to immigration enforcement. Imagine that. A child, just 2 years old, taken away from everything she knows. And for what? To send a message that ICE can act without restraint? This isn't just about immigration. This is about the erosion of the fundamental rights we all hold dear. And here's the scariest part. Jayapal warns that this could be just the beginning. With the administration pushing for more aggressive measures, we could see a scenario where U.S. citizens are sent to countries like El Salvador, a place with a record of severe human rights abuses, all under the guise of immigration enforcement. This is where we start slipping into authoritarian territory. Once you begin detaining your own citizens based on who they are or how they look, you're no longer upholding democracy. You're undermining it. It's that simple. So, here's my message as a left-wing patriot. We can't let this stand. We can't sit back and watch as U.S. citizens are treated like criminals by their own government. We can't allow our country to descend into a place where your rights depend on your ethnicity or the language you speak. If you believe in justice, if you believe in the Constitution, then you need to stand with Representative Jayapal on this one. We need to be clear. No taxpayer money should ever be used to violate the rights of U.S. citizens. Ever. We cannot let this become the norm. These actions are unconstitutional. They're dangerous. They are reckless. And they are fundamentally un-American. So I'm asking you, right now, to make your voice heard. Contact your representatives. Demand that they protect U.S. citizens from ICE overreach. Demand that they stand up for the Constitution, and demand that they stop the unlawful detention and deportation of American citizens. This is bigger than politics. This is about protecting everyone in this country, no matter who they are. We're at a crossroads, folks. It's time to choose the side of justice, equality, and freedom. It's time to say enough is enough. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you believe in standing up for what's right. We got to keep pushing forward because this fight is far from over.